Hey guys, it's Jason Collins. We're in the studio today and we're going to be doing something a little bit different. There's been a discussion in a couple of the Facebook groups, and the question was, is it better to underexpose an image in camera and then raise the exposure in post, or is it better to raise your ISO in camera so you don't have to raise it in post? And the question is, which of those techniques introduces the least amount of noise? Personally, I believe that it's better to raise your ISO in camera, because if it was just a matter of doing it in post, then I don't think that camera manufacturers would be in this sort of race to have the best low light performance. That's one theory. The other theory is the information capture happens on the sensor. So if you're underexposing and you're allowing less light to pass through and interact with the sensor, then you're capturing less data. So if you move that file with limited data onto the computer for post-processing, and then we're using Capture One today, but if you use Lightroom or whatever, and then you raise that exposure artificially, where there is no data, there is no data. And so the software has to do extrapolations, and it has to do all the things that it does, and that inherently introduces noise. At least that's my theory. So today we're going to be shooting on the 5D Mark III. I know that's probably not the top of the line when it comes to low light performance. Just happens to be what I've got in the studio today. We may shoot the 6D2, we may shoot a couple Panasonic Lumix mirrorless cameras later on in other videos, but I just want to focus on this right now to sort of do a proof of theory, right? And so on the 5D Mark III, we have the Tamron G2 70-210 f2.8, and then I have my sort of Peter Hurley. I'll spin this around so you guys can see. I have sort of my low budget Peter Hurley headshot set up here, and this is what I've been using to do some headshots. I'll pop a couple of examples in, but this whole rig right here cost me, not counting light stands obviously, but the two sets of LED lights cost me like less than $100 on eBay. I think it's like 65 or 75 bucks or whatever. And I'm having it's working really well for me in terms of where I'm at right now. Now we're going to be using a standard black pop-up background for this, and that's what we're going to be pulling our shadow data off of, right? So let's jump in here. Like I said, we're tethered into Capture One, so you guys are going to be able to see the images as they pop up. I'll be doing two metering systems today. I'll be using the meter inside the camera to get the exposure, and then I'll also be using my vintage Sekonic light meter, just so we kind of have a baseline. And so I just want to get a balanced exposure to start with, and then we're going to underexpose those. We're going to start at, I think probably the best place to start with this camera lens combination is we'll just start at f8 and ISO 100, and then we'll just look through the viewfinder and we will dial our exposure down to get it to where it is perfectly exposed. According to the meter inside my camera, that gives us 1/60th of a second at f8. And so what I'm also going to do here is I am going to change my shutter to give me a bit of a delay, so I'm not introducing wrong deal, Jason. So I'm not introducing camera shake. I always forget when I'm using this thing that this camera that doesn't have a touch screen, so it takes me a minute to get that sorted out. 2-second delay. Great, perfect. All right, so we've got our focus. We're dead on for exposure. Okay, so that was our first shot, and that was dead on exposure with the meter that is in the camera. I'll pop in there real quick And so you guys aren't bored watching me walk out of the frame, I'll swing this around. I don't know how much you're going to be able to see. And I'll pop in here and I will set this at the same thing we had over there, ISO 100, 1/60th of a second, and that gives us just a shade under, I don't know if you guys can see this, just a shade under f8, f5.6 and some change. So I think that we're probably good. I think we're probably good on our exposure. And so now what we're going to do is we're just going to use shutter speed, and we're going to dial this exposure up, shutter speed up, until we are 2 stops underexposed. 2 stops underexposed gives me 320 at f8 and ISO 100. Okay, and we'll see that pop into Capture One in here in just a second. Obviously, this is an underexposed image. So I'm not going to bore you guys with watching me go through every ISO setting on the camera. I'll cut, fast forward, do whatever we need to do, but I'm going to step through these probably up to, I don't know, maybe 1600 ISO. After that, there's probably going to be a lot of inherent noise anyway, so I want to keep this as clean as we possibly can so that we're really seeing the examples of noise that would be introduced by post-processing or in-camera noise. So I will come back to you guys in just a few minutes. Okay guys, we had to stop at ISO 1600 just because that sort of maxed out my shutter speed for getting the underexposed image. I was at like 1/5000th of a second, and if I go any faster than that, I would have to change my aperture, and I didn't want to do that. I wanted to keep everything static. So we got ISO examples from ISO 100 to ISO 1600. So let's jump over now and take a look at Capture One and see what we can learn about what happens when we adjust these exposures in post-processing. Let's jump over there. Okay, and as our good friend Umesh would tell us, welcome to the wonderful world of Capture One instead of Photoshop, right? So this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to leave this exposure just like this. This is the ISO 100, 1/60th of a second f8, okay? And we are going to then take this underexposed version, which is ISO 100, 1/320th of a second in f8, and we're going to come right over here, and we're just going to, apparently my profile is set to raise the exposure by 0.57. I want to show you guys that this image has been raised 0.57. We are going to set this one back to 0, and then we are going to set this one to 2.0. So this should give us an increase in exposure of 2 stops. Now I think probably what the easiest way to gauge this is to come down here into this black zone here and basically do the same thing for this image in the black zone, and we'll take a look at both of them side by side. And I have a pretty good HP monitor on this computer, and I'm seeing a little bit more. I'll pull this down so you guys can see. I'm seeing a little bit more noise in the white on the post-processed image, and I think I'm seeing a little bit more noise in the black, but it's really, really faint. Now I'm going to move over here onto the area that is the background, which actually had less light on it than this part right here. So this background is very much further back, so it is going to have less light on it. Again, it's difficult to tell at ISO 100 but I do believe that I see some additional noise in there. But here's the thing, though. It's probably nothing that is going to that's going to impact things very much. Like I said, the majority of the noise difference that I saw was in the white, and that's at ISO 100. So let's go ahead and take a look at the same images. Okay, we are going to change this one to 0, and we're going to change this one to 2.0, and then we're going to take a look at these. This is same settings except for shutter speeds are different, obviously, and the ISO changed from 100 to 200, and we're going to zoom in and take a look at the same areas that we looked at before, and try to get these where they're sized correctly for you guys. Okay, obviously we picked up a weird spot of noise there, but as we tool through this, again, I'm seeing a little bit more noise in the light color than I am in the dark color. And then as we come over here and move off of the closest black and onto the distant one, oddly enough, I think I see a little more at ISO 200 in the top image than I do in the bottom image. Okay, interesting. Okay, moving along to ISO 400, and again, same thing. Zero out this exposure, change this exposure to 2.0, and then let's take a look at, probably easier to do it that way. Let's take a look at this area, and let's take a look at this area. That may be a blown pixel on my camera that's given that one little oddity there. I'm zooming in all the way, not seeing a ton of difference there. Let's go to the background, zoom in all the way on the background. Scooch over here, zoom in all the way on the background. Yeah. Now, how this translates to video on Facebook or YouTube or wherever you happen to be watching this, there is a little more noise, it seems, in the background black than what we're seeing in foreground elements. And this is at ISO 400. So let's jump to ISO 800, and again, zero that, and go to this one, and 2 stops on that one, and grab both of them and pull into here and pull into here. If we zoom into 100%, or not really 100%, zoom into maximum magnification on Capture One, things are still, in my opinion, holding up pretty well on the black in the foreground. So let's tell you what, let's cruise over here to this side just to see if we can see any difference from this side of the image to the other side of the image. Dial that one in and go all the way to the corner and see. Go all the way, go all the way. Nope, I'm not seeing a ton of difference here. Okay, so going to 1600, 0, 1600, 2. Bring these out and I'll take a look at them. There and there. Zoom in on this one. Zoom in on this one. Oh yeah. So we can really start to see now. We pull this up all the way. So this is all the way max magnification on Capture One, and we can really see at 1600 noise start to pop in on this. And I bet you if we zoom and we get out here onto this, we're probably, no, not too bad back there. Yeah, not too bad back there either. So definitely on this foreground deal here, we can see some noise start to pick up on that with the image that was shot at 1600 underexposed at 1/5000th of a shutter, and then brought up 2 stops in post. Obviously, if we bring this up probably more, we're going to start to see, you know, so now we're at, let's just manually put that in. Now we're at 3 stops in post, and that's really showing up there. So just as a curiosity, let's go back and pull all of them up 3 stops. Yeah, 3 stops is going to probably show considerable noise, no matter what. And we'll check this one. 3 stops. Yeah. Obviously, though, let's go ahead and zoom this one in all the way, and zoom this one in all the way, and take a look at both of them. The properly exposed image has got a much tighter noise pattern than what you get with the underexposed image. And that goes back to what I had said earlier in the beginning. If there's no data there to process, then there's no data there to process. So at 100 ISO and a proper exposure, you're capturing this much data. And at 100 ISO and 2 stops underexposed, or 800, I'm sorry, 800 ISO. Whew, I'm getting confused here. At 800 ISO, you're missing all of these pieces of data. So let's go back up here then, and we will pull 3 stops on the 100 ISO, and then we'll pull 3 stops on the 100 ISO underexposed. And we should see something very similar, right? So again, we're looking at a very regular noise pattern here, which tells us that pretty much every pixel on here has a value. And then when you raise ISO, you're just amplifying that value of that pixel. Down here, even though we've raised it 3 stops, there's a lot of data that's missing on here. So if we raise this bottom one 5 stops, which should bring it to the same exposure that this one is, theoretically, you can really see now all of these black pixels in here are places where the sensor did not receive any data because it was underexposed. So this is definitely not a scientific, you know, like purely scientific evaluation of anything, really. It's just furthering a discussion that we've had. I think I see some evidence to support the fact that, you know, underexposed images carry less data in each pixel. We know that, right? That's an obvious thing. No earth-shattering revelation on that one, right? But the question is, when you purposefully underexpose and then raise your exposure value in post to achieve a certain look, you're definitely losing some detail. Now, if you're okay with that and your look is such that, you know, it's okay with you to lose that data, go for it. No, I mean, art is super subjective, and if you're happy with what you're creating, go for it. Okay? If you're looking for the most data that you can possibly have in order to do post-production, which is what I think is the best thing, right? Then you're definitely not going to want to underexpose. I usually shoot things about a 1/3 stop overexposed, unless it's something super bright, like a snow scene or a beach scene, or something where highlights are the predominant light value in the scene. I would underexpose that to preserve those highlights in post, because you don't want to shoot over the 255, right? You hit 256 and that's just plain blown out white, and you've exceeded the data capacity of the pixel. But if you can get close to that, you know, 254, you've got a lot of data in that pixel to work with. So The rule that I was taught years ago, okay, was you slightly overexpose a dark scene and you slightly underexpose a bright scene to protect the shadows in the dark scene, because you don't want zeros in your shadows, because then that's black pixels that you can't do anything with. Those are effectively dead pixels with no data in them, and you don't want that. You want to have a little bit of something that you can work with there. So overexposed dark scenes to protect the shadows, underexposed bright scenes to protect the highlights. Get it right in camera. I mean, to me, that's a no-brainer. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this. Again, not a scientific thing, just a thing to think about. I firmly believe that a rising tide lifts all ships. The better you get at photography, the better photography is for everyone. God bless you guys and have a great day.